Now let's move on and talk about birds. There's several characteristics that separate birds from other animals. First of all, this is the first group of animals that are consistently endothermic. That is, they keep their temperature at a certain setting regardless of the exterior temperature or the environmental temperature. So their temperature, body temperature, may be 100 to 101 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is a temperature that they maintain whether it's 10 degrees outside or 100 degrees outside. And so this group is separate from previous groups that we've looked at in that they're capable of maintaining their temperature. Secondly, this group has a four-chambered heart. That is, they have two atria and two ventricles. And this is the first time that we have complete segregation of the arterial blood from the venous blood, and a complete segregation of oxygenated blood from deoxygenated blood. They have a toothless bill. They feed by means of a toothless bill. They have no teeth. And then they have egg. They are all egg-bearing. That is, they are oviparous. They lay eggs. The eggs are hatched outside their body. And these eggs are consistent in that they have a lime-containing shell. Now, reptile eggs do not generally contain lime. They tend to be soft and more leathery on the outside, whereas the shells of these birds are hard, somewhat brittle, and contain lime. And then lastly, one of the ways they promote flight is the fact that their skeleton is made up of very porous, lightweight bones, which are mechanically arranged in such a way to maximize strength while minimizing weight. Now, birds also are fairly unique in the fact that they all have feathers, and this is a picture, and there's a very nice picture in your book of the types of feathers that birds have. Now, the feathers are separated, but first of all, they come from an area in the skin called the follicle, and the quill of the feather attaches to the follicle on the bird, and then it extends from that point. The shaft of the feather is this central part that goes from the point all the way to the top. Now, the shaft is then divided into two parts. There's the quill, which is this part before the start of the vein, and then the rest of the shaft, which is called the rachis. And so this central area, which is called the shaft, is separated or separately called a quill on one end, and then the rest is called the rachis. And off the rachis comes the second major part, which is known as the vein of the feather. So the vein of the feather is actually made up of two parts. There are the extensions from the rachis, which are called the barbs. And then between the barbs are these smaller extensions, and they're known as barbules. And barbules can either be smooth like this, or they can have hooks which allow them to interdigitate and form a fairly sequential or consecutive area where air cannot pass through. So reviewing this, we have a follicle, and out from the follicle comes the quill. Then the quill, which is one part of the shaft, the rest of the shaft is called the rachis. The vein, which is right here, comes off of the rachis and is made up of a barb, which are these parts, and then these intermediate parts known as barbules. Now, there are two types of feathers. There are the feathers that are close to the body, which are called down feathers, and these are used to warm the body. They're very much like the hair that's close to a mammal's body. They have smooth barbules so that the various barbs do not really hold together very well. And if you look at a down feather, it's very fluffy and does not have that sort of stiff quality to the vein. The contour feathers, on the other hand, have hooked barbules so that the vein is very continuous and does not allow the passage of air. And the contour feathers are generally on the wings and are part of the flight. They're also on the outside of the bird and act as a water repellent. Now, it's not mentioned in your book, but there are actually several different kinds of flight. This flapping flight is what is also called power flight. This is when the bird takes off. Then there's gliding, which is very much like hand gliding, where the bird finds upward drafts and glides on those upward drafts and actually gains altitude because of the air drafts. Then there's also not diving, but down gliding, where they sort of go down. It's called circling here. And then lastly, there's the fourth type, which is hovering. This is also seen in the specialized hovering that's seen in hummingbirds. Now, the things that make birds built for flight include the feathers, their wings, and the fact that they are biped, that is, they walk on their lower legs and their upper arms are free, and they are then wings that they can use for flight. The skeletal structure, which I have mentioned before, which is a very lightweight structure that allows for protection, but at the same time is very lightweight. And then lastly, and this is not mentioned in your book, but they have a very powerful pectoral muscles which power their wings, and their sternum is shaped in such a way, it's called pectus cariniatum, which means that their sternum comes out very much like the keel of a boat, and it allows for the attachment of these powerful pectoral muscles. And all of these work together to allow the birds to fly. Now, the last group that we're going to consider today are mammals. And the things that separate mammals from other animals are as follows. First of all, they have hair that covers their skin. Almost all mammals, not all, but almost all mammals have a significant amount of hair that covers the skin. Secondly, they reproduce generally by internal fertilization, and usually their young are born alive. Now, there are exceptions to this, and I'll go over some of that in just a minute. But their young are born alive. Most mammals do not lay eggs. They nourish their young with milk from specialized glands, and you can see both of these are pictures of, this is a cat that is feeding her kittens, and a dog that's feeding the pups. And in both these cases, they're latched on to these specialized milk-producing glands that the mammals produce. And this is actually where they get their name. Mammal comes from mammary, which is milk-producing. They also have a four-chambered heart, and they are also endothermic. Now, these top three are much more unique to mammals than the bottom two. Obviously, we saw the bottom two characteristics also in birds. Now, instead of feathers, mammals have hair. Now, some of these aspects are very similar. First of all, instead of a follicle that produces a feather, they have a follicle that produces a hair, and this follicle serves to nourish the hair and also serves to produce oil and various other substances that make the hair more functional. There are two types of hair. Most mammals have underhair, which is very much like the undergarments that a person wears that are close to the body, and they serve to act as a heat insulator. Mammals have guard hair as well that gives the mammals its color and also allows for it to have protection from the elements and protection from other mammals. Mammals are the first group that have what is known as a placenta. And a placenta is an internal structure in the mother that allows the embryo to feed from the mother's blood. And what essentially occurs is this is the placenta right here. Here's mother's blood and here's baby's blood. Now the placenta is technically part of the baby. And the blood exchanges oxygen and nutrients across this boundary, and then it feeds from the mother's nutrients and from the mother's oxygen, and it gets rid of its waste that way. This cord right here that allows for the baby to feed is called the umbilical cord. And the period of time that this embryo will stay inside the mother and develop is called the gestational period. And the gestational period varies from mammal to mammal. And as I said before, mammals, once the babies are born, mammals produce milk through a specialized structure for the purpose of feeding the young offspring. Now, mammals can be separated into placental mammals, which are mammals that have a placenta and their young are born fully formed. And here's a large group of various mammals that are placental mammals. And then non-placental mammals, which are mammals that do not form a placenta. And these also can actually be divided into two. There are the marsupials and then the egg-bearing. The marsupials are mammals whose embryos partially develop internally. Then this partially developed fetus will come out of the mother, crawl down her fur and into a pouch where the remainder of the development occurs. And almost all marsupial animals live in Australia except for the possum, which lives in North America. And here's a kangaroo, which is an example of a marsupial animal. Now the other non-placental animal is the monotrema, which is the duck-billed platypus, and this is the only egg-laying mammal that is currently in existence. And this is an example of the duck-billed platypus. The flying mammals are called bats, and here's an example of a bat. Dogs, cats, bears, lions, and various other mammals like these are all part of a subgroup called the carnivora. Carnivora stands for meat-eating or flesh-eating, and they are distinguished by their specialized teeth and claws that are used for that purpose. And here's a tiger, which is another one that's in that group. And notice the teeth. It's interesting, the tiger's teeth can actually sense the pulse of its prey, and it knows, it can actually feel the pulse of its prey in its mouth, and when the prey dies, it knows that it's dead. And then whales, dolphins, and porpoises are aquatic mammals, and that's why they always correct people who say that dolphins are fish. They're not fish, they're mammals. And here's an example of some of those: killer whales, dolphins, various other types. Continuing the classification, elephants are part of a group of mammals with long trunks that are distinguished by those trunks. Horses and zebras are part of a group of hoofed mammals, and the hoofed mammals interestingly are also separated into those hoofed mammals that have even numbers of toes and the hoofed mammals that have odd numbers of toes. And here's some examples of hoofed mammals. You see the horse, the zebra, and the cow. The cow is also a ruminant, which means that it eats in a certain way. Squirrels, rats, and mice are all part of rodentia, which are gnawing mammals, or rodents. And here's an example. This is actually a chipmunk, which is a type of rodentia. Finishing up the classification, rabbits are rodent-like, but are not considered rodents. The anteater is in a group of its own called a dentata, which means that it has this long tubular snout that it's used to eat with. And that's not a trunk like a elephant. That's its entire mouth. Shrew, moles, and hedgehogs eat insects and thus are called insectivora. And this is a shrew, actually. And then lastly, apes, monkeys, and humans are part of primates. They stand erect. There are the erect mammals. Remember, birds were the other bipeds that stand erect, but they're in a whole different subgroup than mammals. So that ends our discussion of these three groups of animals: the mammals, the birds, and the reptiles. Next week we'll begin talking about plants.